Hi, everyone. How have you enjoyed the concert or the conference so far?
They would have enjoyed a concert a lot.
I know, right? I know we're at the end of the day, so bear with us. We'll try to keep it interesting. We're going to try to have a lot of discussion, so we're not just sitting here, having you listen to us talk on and on. So I'm Jessica Jenkins, and this is Allison Malott. We are from the SPEC program. We are an independent facilitator group who contracts with early childhood centers as well as school districts to bring and implement PBIS. So we run on a variety of grant funding and private funding as well. So we have a little bit of a different take from early childhood centers who may be implementing independently.
All right, and so just to be intentional about our time here, we do have some kind of goals for the day. We'd like you to gain an understanding about the implementation and organization of the rapid response model. So this is a model that's being used specifically in York and Adams County at the moment, so we're just going to be talking through that a lot in the presentation. We'd also like you to be able to utilize classroom coaching to support pyramid model adoption for centers in crisis. And so when we talk about centers in crisis, we're really talking about programs that have said, we are up against the wall and we are going to kick this kid out, okay? So we want you to be able to utilize coaching to kind of pull people back from that ledge a little bit and do so successfully. And then we'd also like you to gain an understanding of strategies that support inclusion and limit suspension and expulsions in early childhood programs. And that is really the goal of our rapid response team and the work that we're doing.
So the problem that we've identified in our county specifically for rapid response, which I know is universal across the state, is that suspension and expulsion rates are really high in early childhood and are linked with negative life outcomes. We've all heard of the preschool to prison pipeline. If you've been here all day, you've probably heard that. So what we're trying to do is help to eliminate that and try to give centers the support that they need to get through these challenges. So we have a little video here that kind of talks about what the consequences are of expulsion and suspension in early childhood.
Did you know that infants, toddlers, and young children are being suspended and expelled from childcare and preschool programs at rates even higher than K through 12? Young children under 5 years old are expelled from state-funded preschools at 3 times the rate of K through 12. Private and community child care programs expel children at more than 13 times the rate of K through 12 students. Exclusionary discipline practices, such as suspensions and expulsions, deprive children of valuable early learning experiences and teach them to believe that there is something wrong or bad about them. Suspensions and expulsions are disproportionately applied by age, gender, and race. 4-year-olds are expelled at a rate about 50% greater than 3-year-olds. Boys are expelled 4.5 times more than girls are. Black children account for almost 50% of public preschool suspensions, but comprise less than 1/5 of all preschoolers. Black children are also estimated to be twice as likely to be expelled as Latino and white children, and more than 5 times as likely to be expelled as Asian children. Several studies have found that racial disparities in discipline are not explained by children's behavior. That is, black children do not behave any worse than white children. Rather, they are subject to harsher discipline for similar behaviors as their peers. Implicit bias and cultural differences in views on discipline strategies and their application to teacher-child relationships play a role in exclusionary discipline practices. Early childhood suspensions and expulsions are not as much a result of child behaviors as they are related to adult and program characteristics. A lack of processes and policies for addressing challenging behavior and suspending and expelling children is one factor. Another factor is related to the stress that child care providers or teachers with implicit, unacknowledged biases come across when perceiving that a child is misbehaving too much and not knowing the right strategies to prevent or address the challenging behavior. This leads to a child being sent to the director's office and in-school suspension, being sent home early and out-of-school suspension, or the determination that the child is not a good fit and is asked not to return, an expulsion. The child is deprived of valuable educational experiences and set on a negative path.
Has anyone seen that video before? Okay, I see some hands. Some of those statistics are really terrifying. There is a huge proportion of disproportionality in our child care world, especially with suspension and expulsion. Was anyone surprised with any of those statistics? Yes. Okay. I think it's something that Allison and I have both seen. We also come from the early intervention world. We are both providers as therapists in our county as well. So we have a dual perspective, seeing this as our clients are at risk for expulsion for behavior challenge, and then also being in the PBIS facilitation world where we see centers maybe identifying children who are struggling with challenging behavior in the classroom. So one of the things I wanted to talk about under the problem that we also identified here is that families are under extreme stress because their child is displaced and removed from a child care center or are at risk for being removed. This can cause a major disruption in the family's household. So we're looking at possible employment changes. A family could be let go because they no longer have child care. The child could have disruption of their home classroom and the relationships that they've built within the classroom with their providers and their peers. And then also, we've seen that families who are receiving subsidized child care are going to be at risk for losing that benefit as well. And that is hugely important for some of the families that we're serving. So when we're making a decision to talk about suspension and expulsion, this is just not removing a child from a program. This is affecting a family at like the core of their needs. This is really affecting their stability. Early learning programs struggle with challenging behavior, as we all know, because there are so many topics today at the forum about managing challenging behavior, and you guys are looking for immediate support. This is another one of the reasons why we created the Rapid Response Program. Gaining support for behavioral health concerns can be a difficult process. If you don't know who to reach out to gain support for the child who's experiencing challenging behaviors, if you don't have connections with mental health providers, with county case management, it can be really hard to get families on board to agree to reach out to those supports. We also know that challenging behavior creates teacher burnout and increases turnover rates at our centers, which is what we're trying to avoid. And I think one more thing to notice too is when suspension and expulsion is being discussed, sometimes these kiddos who do have challenging behaviors in the classroom, this could be their second, third, fourth, fifth child care center that they've been at, which is also a level of stress coming down on the family that they may be running out of options for places to take their kiddos to. And we all know in the early childhood world, a lot of times we all talk with each other. So we may kind of, bump elbows and say, well, so-and-so just got kicked out of this child care center. Hope he doesn't come to yours. So we would like to stop that process.
So as we're thinking about community collaboration, let me go to the next slide. Ta-da. Potentially. There we go. We want you to find some people close to you and think through 3 different questions. The first is, what are your experiences accessing community resources for children with challenging behavior? Can you give an example of a successful collaboration with a community partner? So we're going to try to keep it positive on that question. And then third, what outcome did it have for the child and family in your program? So take a couple minutes, chat with the people around you, and then please be prepared to share out a couple examples. All right, take about 10 more seconds. Finish up what your topic. Okay, we're going to bring it back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, what were some examples? Let's start with the first one. Experiences accessing community resources. There's not enough of them. Great point. Okay. It is a lengthy process. Yes, yeah. What else? Yes. Yeah.
And I'm one of the community resources, thinking of like behavioral health, EI, and the program that like come together and all really want to. I mean, it's rare, but I'm thinking of one recently where we had an amazing meeting. Did not want to expel the child. So and the preschool was like so on board, and they wanted the help. They wanted the strategies. So coming together, and it really worked out. It doesn't always happen, I agree, but like thinking of a positive one.
Yeah. And that has been our experience too. When that collaboration actually happens, it works, and it works really well for kids and for families. What about, we had one example of a positive experience or a successful experience. Anybody else had any success stories? Yeah, Linda.
We had a child who was exhibiting some challenging behaviors. He also had an IEP.
Okay.
So our IU just kind of swooped in very quickly and helped put a lot of supports in place.
Okay.
The psychologist had attack.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's easier, right, when you already have some supports in place, to add in supports is a much easier process than starting from scratch, right? What else? What outcomes did it have for the child or family in your program? Any success stories? Or we'll take horror stories too, I guess, at this point. What else?
Once we've gotten that support in place at the early childhood level, we've been able to hear back from the parents as the child has gone on and said, man, I'm so glad you helped us get started. We've gotten this and this and this support, and now they're doing really well in elementary school. And, you know, hearing back from the parents that if you hadn't stepped in and pushed when they were 13, I don't know where we would have been.
That's awesome when you get to see those long-term benefits, when you see that, man, all those kind of, that pushing a little bit, right? That actually paid off and it was worth it. Excellent. Okay, so it sounds like we have some experience with it, and it sounds like a lot of you have encountered the same challenges that we were seeing. So moving into that importance of community collaboration.
So we want to take a look at why this matters. We've already talked about some of the benefits that you guys have experienced in your own centers, but bringing collaboration of community partners together allows for a collective impact commitment from multiple agencies to address the problem of suspension and expulsion. We've also seen that it eases access to resources, which could support inclusion. So if you are trying to set up kind of a one-stop shop for communication with other agencies, this can be a really great tool to utilize. We've had the benefit of being able to include early intervention, behavioral health partners, and then also our regional keys from the Keystone Stars program to come to the table to help, who already have those connections with childcare centers. We get to continue to have communication with these partners because we all know that we're not going to just see each other one time. There will be more children who come along that experience challenges. We may see a couple of centers over and over again who could be experiencing challenges in a particular classroom. Even though we have one child who has been addressed, we all know there's 5 more coming up the pipeline. So it's good to have those connections already made. And also it's been really great collaborating with early learning programs and mental health providers because it has reduced rates of expulsion and has improved outcomes for our kids. An example that I can give you is that my most recent rapid response referral that I received actually came from a parent, which is very different from what we're used to. A lot of times it is the center calling us specifically and reaching out for support with a child. This was a child who moved in from another county, and the family had 2 children at this particular childcare center. One was an infant and one was a 4-year-old. The 4-year-old had been experiencing challenging behaviors, eloping, running out onto George Street in New York City. If you know what that's like, that is a really urban area, and it is very dangerous because there's a lot of traffic, and a bunch of other things too that created some unsafe situations. So the family reached out to us specifically for support. So I was able to call our adolescent mental health supervisor to be able to get her on board, to connect with the family, to get case management started so that we could look at a mental health evaluation for this child if they indeed needed therapeutic staff support or a BSC to come to the center with them and at home, because there were challenges at home that were identified as well. I also reached out to the regional key to have her follow up with the director of the child care center to see if there was anything that they needed as far as any more trainings, any more supports. And I think it wrapped up really quickly because I got the family what they needed. They didn't feel like they needed any coaching support from us. I would like to think differently, but that's that's another day. So the family was satisfied with the outcome, but the caveat was that the child was not to return to the center until they had that behavioral health support. So had we not stepped in and gotten the mental health case management on board, this family would have had no idea where to turn because they were coming in from another county. So I think it's important to kind of think back too, when I mentioned that they had an infant, they were now running the infant to childcare. The 4-year-old had to stay home with the father who worked night shift. Mom worked full-time during the day. What do you think that did to that family? They were losing it, that mom was calling me every day, like, what's the progress? What's the progress? What's the progress? What supports do we have? Because time was a sensitive issue. This is not something that we need to take lightly. It's not something where you get rid of that kid and it doesn't set off a course of events. This is affecting these families deep down to the core.
And so in response not only to those challenges, but also to Octal's suspension and expulsion announcement and inclusion announcements, rapid response was kind of born. And it started as we were pretty intentional about selecting this picture because it really is this SOS call. Okay, so we know that there are some kids that maybe you're like, oh, yeah, they might could use an evaluation, or yeah, we might be able to benefit from some extra supports for this kiddo. But for these kids, it's an immediate need. Right? It is a crisis situation where they are going to be kicked out of their program if they don't receive some immediate supports. And they don't have time to wait on a 6-month waiting list. Right? And their teachers are not willing to let them sit on a 6-month waiting list and be in their classroom. So it is that SOS call. And so our early intervention office, the county director, formed this team. And it pulled in a supervisor from early intervention, a couple of behavior support therapists. We pulled in the ELRCs, so those early learning resource centers, and Keystone Stars specialists. I think that's what they're still called. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But what are they? Quality coaches. Thank you. I knew they changed their name. Thank you. And then we also pulled in a county mental health coordinator and a licensing specialist from DHS. And then we had PBIS facilitators on the team too, to help support that coaching model. And what we were able to do with that, the team met quarterly, so it wasn't a huge time commitment for us, but it centralized that decision making. So if one of us went out and said, hey, teacher's saying the kid can't sit in circle time, and we go out and circle time's 45 minutes, okay, well that's something we can coach on. Right? If we go out and we walk in and we're like, ooh, teacher's got some really good practices going on, but family maybe needs some mental health supports. It's a really easy call to access those supports, right? We just email the other person on the team and they're out. So that's where, in early education, we are really good about kind of creating silos of resources for families, and it's like, well, you call this for this, and this for this, and this for this, and this for this. But this model really enabled all of that to be streamlined to really help support these families.
So some additional things we wanted to note too that we were able to provide for our centers and our families. We at times were just bringing PBIS out for a first taste. So a lot of the families that are centers that we're accessing right now are very grassroots. These are centers who have chosen maybe not to participate with their STARS quality coach. So we're looking at very basic, effective workforce practices a lot of the times. So we may not necessarily even be able to get to any kind of tier 1 strategies within the classroom because maybe administration's a hot mess. So sometimes we have to look at that. And that can include sitting down with the director and administration and talking about policy and procedure. Do you have a suspension and expulsion policy? What does your challenging behavior policy look like? Is it 3 strikes and you're out? What are 3 strikes? Like that's totally up to interpretation. Could you have 3 strikes for 6 months and then you start all over again, or do you get 3 strikes in one day? Like we need to really kind of tune that up a little bit so that things are more concrete and more obvious to really help back up the decisions that you're making in your center in regards to these challenges. So we spent a lot of time looking at that depending on what these centers were looking for. We also provided screening tools. When we initially started this program, we were grant funded, so we were able to provide ASQ SE2 screening tools for the centers who called for help so that we could start to walk them through that. And the idea then was to funnel them into early intervention if any of the children were screening at risk. We were also making referrals to the IU and the 3 to 5 program, as well as kind of having some parent meetings to talk about if other behavioral health supports were needed. Because also, when you have a child who is experiencing behavioral health challenges, could there be other things happening in the home with the parents that are affecting this as well? So we would like to try to treat the whole family if possible, if the family was open to it. So some other things we would provide as well: classroom coaching, targeting teacher-identified challenges. So if we were coming in and we realized that effective workforce looked pretty okay, and we really needed to kind of dial in and help that teacher right away to kind of take some of that anxiety and intensity off, we would do a little short burst of classroom coaching. Now, it's not the kind of classroom coaching that you would do as a PBIS coach when you're fully implementing, but it was enough to give them a little bit of a taste of what that feels like. And then we would come back and reflect about the classroom practices that we identified that maybe we needed to support. So some of my centers, I sat next to the teacher while they were working with that child who they identified, and I talked them through strategies as they were in the moment to provide support. Some people didn't want that. Some people wanted me to sit in the back of the room and take notes furiously and then meet with them at break. It really just depended on the personality. But I also tried to then follow up with the director to let them know the challenges that we've identified, and then also talking about what resources, what trainings, what supports can we follow up with in giving these teachers so that we're not just leaving them out to dry, so to speak. So in regards to some of the trainings that we've also provided, we have gone over how to administer the ASQ SE2. We've done work trainings to be able to work through the tool, identifying how to fill it out. It's very family friendly, as we all know. It's teacher friendly. But we also spent a lot of time talking about challenging conversations with families. What do we do with the results of the ASQ? Because sometimes we know that children look very different in a classroom versus what they look like at home. How do we work through that disparity? Because some families are not going to want to hear it. So we spent a lot of time talking about how to bridge the gap and build those connections with families to be able to talk about those things. One of the other trainings that we provided to a center was about juvenile diabetes. They identified that completely on their own because they felt it was an area that they were lacking understanding and being able to safely administer insulin injections if they were to get a child on their roster with that. And oddly enough, right after that training was completed by one of our in-house nurses, a child was enrolled with juvenile diabetes at that center. So it was kind of like some divine intervention right there. So like I mentioned, we did a lot of assistance with writing policy and procedure, connecting with families, and then also community resources. Some of our kiddos who are at child care centers may experience medical challenges and are no longer safe to attend that particular school. So making connections with medical childcare was important. Where do we send somebody who has nursing on site, who can do trach care, who can work with a child on a vent, or has a seizure disorder, or other things of that nature? And then also supporting families with accessing medical assistance. Because if your insurance isn't going to cover the work that we're trying to help you get, what are we doing? And medical assistance, as if you are familiar with it, you know is a real beast to traverse. So.
Yep, so those were a lot of the different things. We navigated this as we went. So originally we kind of thought, okay, we're going to be dealing with kind of our wheelhouse of like kids with challenging behaviors, and we're going to get the elopers and the biters and the kids that throw chairs, right? That's what we were anticipating. But what we really found out was that, and what we probably should have realized going into it, was that inclusion is about so much more than those kids, right? And so that's where we ended up pulling in those nursing pieces and saying, okay, how do we walk families through all of these processes that they really need to maybe have or need support with to really create this inclusive environment in early education programs. And so some of the benefits that we've seen from expanding that is just this idea that, like with the program with the juvenile diabetes training, they planned to be inclusive, right? They didn't have a kid that they were like, oh, what do we do now, right? They planned for that to happen, and they knew that that was a challenge for them in the past, and so we wanted to work through that with them. But one of the primary benefits to me of the model, because I have some background as a program director, is that 48-hour response time. So when a program calls, within 48 hours, somebody from our team is at their center, okay? And often that first meeting, I'm not sure how we manage it, but somehow we shuffle and shift and we get out there somehow. But we're out there within those 48 hours, and we talk a lot about in pyramid model practices about recognizing and acknowledging and affirming children's emotions. And what I find, at least in that first meeting, is often I'm acknowledging the teacher's emotions too, right? I know this is hard for you, right? And for teachers, at least the teachers that I have worked with, have very much wanted to help the child. They just didn't feel like they had enough tools in their toolbox to be able to do that successfully. So I have never walked into a program and had a teacher tell me, I just want this kid to go. I've walked into a lot of programs and they said, I don't know how to safely support this child. Okay, and that's a very different story. And so that idea that somebody's going to come out, we're going to form a plan together, and we're going to work with you to help support the inclusion of this kiddo, that's what really mattered. And I don't think it's fair to tell teachers that are in that position, just wait 6 months, okay, or wait 3 months, or wait 1 month, right? Because that child's coming back day after day after day, and you're genuinely often concerned about their safety or the safety of other kiddos in your classroom. And that's a really hard place to be in. So for me, that 48-hour response time is one of the primary benefits. That family and program connection to community resources is streamlined. Again, we're really good about siloing those resources, I think, in a lot of different fields, but in early education, and telling families, okay, go through this loop, and then go through this loop, and then, well, we might need you to go through this loop too, in order to access appropriate services. And so when we have the ability as a team to just make that happen and say, hey, I've got somebody that'll be out tomorrow to help you walk through the mental health pieces of this, that's really helpful. The other piece is also, and just kind of hit on it, making connections between the family and the program and helping to solidify those relationships. So sometimes I think it is hard for teachers and for programs to have those conversations with families and be able to walk them through that. The other piece of this model is if the family isn't on board quite yet, we can still do classroom coaching with the teacher. So we might not be able to pull all of the resources without family buy-in, but we can give the teacher support and help them add to their toolbox, okay? So that piece has been helpful as well. And we're also individualizing those supports. We know that every kid is different, and I have yet to go out to a program and hear the exact same story. okay, or meet the exact same kid. And so the ability to say, one person's going to come out, and this might not be a PBIS classroom coaching issue, but I know somebody that can help you, and they'll be out tomorrow. Okay, so we can really quickly identify that and individualize the supports that families and children are receiving. We do a lot of classroom coaching, though. That is probably the primary function of the group and what we spend the most time with. And then we also have those trainings that are available if we have programs that identify a specific area of need. I mean, trainings are tricky, right? Because teachers don't necessarily implement them into practice. And so we have found that coaching model to be better, and we're going to talk about that piece a little bit as well.
So to kind of piggyback on those benefits, we're really helping staff to be able to understand children's behavior and gain confidence and competence in being able to respond effectively to challenging behavior. It's no longer that feeling of, well, I tried timeout, I tried ignoring, I tried removing the child, I tried sending them to the director's office. It didn't work. Now we're starting to really hone in and identify those areas that the teacher is doing to really contribute to some of the changes that are happening in the classroom. I also like to take it back to the family. We're also finding that a lot of times when we're addressing challenging behavior in the classroom and we can get those parents to the table to talk to us, that there is some crossover, and once we can kind of bridge that gap, we can get the families to open up a little bit more about what's happening at home so that we can support them as well. And our hope is not to divide. We're trying to get the families to come to the table and to partner with the centers so that we have much more success. We've also noticed that community partnerships have been able to help reduce suspension and expulsion. So if we can bring in early intervention, if we can bring in the IU, if we can bring in Keystone Stars quality coaches, if we can bring in behavioral health, a lot of times that can help keep these students in the classroom instead of sending them off to another program. We also look at introducing and supporting programs in early pyramid model adoption. So as I had mentioned before, a good majority of the centers that are reaching out for rapid response support are nowhere even close to having any knowledge of what the pyramid model is. So this is a really great way for us to just start kind of inserting those elements in little bits at a time so that they get a taste for it, and maybe we can start having conversations that, okay, well, we're done with our rapid response time, we resolved the problem, but do you want a little bit more? Let's talk about the pyramid model. And then we can start funneling them in, because we try to let them know that rapid response is a Band-Aid, and this is not going to help long term. As I mentioned before, you're going to have more children with challenging behaviors. We know that the landscape of early childhood has changed so dramatically in the last couple of years because of all of the things that our families in the community are facing. Opioid addiction, divorce, homelessness, all kinds of stuff, domestic violence. These things are not going away. They're only going to get more significant. So we really need to be able to get these centers to recognize the change that they need to make so that we can do more and we can stop these situations from happening.
All right, so even though most of our programs are not implementing pyramid model practices, rapid response, that model really just links really nicely with the pyramid, and we coach surrounding pyramid model practices. And so some of those links, we have this improved relationship between community partners and early education programs. And so when we talk about those nurturing and responsive relationships at the bottom of the pyramid, and you're looking at your BOQs and your teapots and your tippy toes, we're thinking about those relationships in terms of how they relate to families and kids and teachers, right? But we also need to think about other people that are maybe coming into your program, like early intervention therapists or IU therapists, if children are receiving other supports, right? How are we connecting with those community partners, and how are we forming those nurturing and responsive relationships with them? The model also supports retention of teachers, which, if you're going to be implementing pyramid model practices, you know that if you get stuck down there on effective workforce and you're constantly giving a new staff orientation training, it makes it really hard to train teachers a little further up the pyramid, right? And so what we want to do is secure the not only the retention of kids in their program, but also teachers in their program, because we know that that directly impacts the quality of the program. It also builds a more effective workforce. So that idea that we are giving teachers more tools for their tool belt. Okay, they're going to be better teachers because even the limited amount of coaching that we're giving, which is we typically do around 8 hours for a program, right? But when that's direct support to one teacher, that can really help that teacher improve their skills. So we're building that effective workforce piece out. And then, like Jess said, it's allowing for that introduction of pyramid model practices. And that was kind of a happy accident for us. So we really thought that we would just be going in and sticking on a Band-Aid or like stopping the major bleeding, so to speak. But what we were able to do, and what was really neat about this, was we had a lot of programs that said, this actually worked. How about that? Okay, so what else can you give us, and how else can we do this, and how can we expand this? And then we got to have conversation with directors surrounding their policies and procedures and the supports that they're providing to teachers. And so then we have a couple programs now that have started to actually engage in our working towards fidelity implementation. And so not just we got to do more than slap a Band-Aid on it. We got to really help change some programs, which was awesome. We also thought that this was kind of an interesting piece. We'll call it that. If you are a program that is multi-site, we've talked a lot about trying to increase buy-in as you're rolling out to new sites or to new classrooms. Because we experienced so much success with giving a little bit of coaching to teachers, that might be something to consider as you're looking at that rollout, providing some teaching support, because that's what really, I would say, pushed that desire to begin implementation, was teachers saying, this worked and I want more. Okay, and so when teachers were able to see that direct benefit, I know often we start with like the policies and procedures, and that's really important for implementation. But when teachers were able to see, hey, this is going to matter to me, and it's going to change my classroom, and I'm not going to go home exhausted every day, that's a really easy way. Well, they might still go home exhausted every day. Sorry, let me rephrase that. They're still going to go home exhausted, but maybe exhausted and happy as opposed to exhausted and weeping. Okay, I'll rephrase. I saw faces. I saw the faces. Yeah. Girl, I've been in a 2-year-old room. I get it. But that idea that we were changing that for teachers, and they were able to do that buy-in.
And just to add to that, I think it was really interesting to see like the confidence swell in some of these teachers, and then also the fact that they are being validated. Like you could see it, like, oh my gosh, you see this too. I'm not crazy. Like this is what's happening right now. And you're listening to me and you're giving me tools. And you could just see that they were finally feeling like they were heard and validated. And that alone gave them so much more confidence to work on trying these strategies, which I think was so important. It was so cool to see. And then to come back a couple weeks later to check in and see that they're still working through it, or to see that they put up a visual schedule and they're trying to figure out how to work that into their classroom teaching and their routines. So we're going to go over some of the tools for implementation that we've created. If you guys want to look at the handouts that we provided, this is really terrible, so we created some handouts for you to be able to see exactly what we're looking at here. But when we would first go out to a center, when we would have that initial contact with the director, we would provide this director self-reflection tool, and we would also provide a teacher self-reflection tool. There are some Tier 1 elements on here that we just kind of wanted to see that we thought were the most important to start with to really create that baseline. We wanted to see where staff and administration was with some of these ideas already, if they could tell us that they were using them, if they were truthful about using them, or, because sometimes you observe and then they tell you something different and it's never the same. But we wanted to see where everyone was at. So we wanted to create this baseline. We wanted staff to be able to identify some areas that they would like some coaching support on. So if you go down through, a lot of these things are very similar to Teapot and Tippy Toes elements. So we wanted to really focus our coaching in these areas. We did not do it for our first run with rapid response, but moving forward, we're hoping to also provide a post self-reflection form so that we can see any data that we can collect for changes to show the efficacy of our coaching.
And then we also had that program assessment and action plan. And this piece was maybe developed because I feel like I'm a little scatterbrained. And so I often go to meetings or to trainings and I leave thinking, that was awesome and I'm totally gonna do that, like tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and my life happens to me and it doesn't quite look like I thought it was going to. And so we were intentional about creating an action plan so that we were able to set goals with the teacher and then figure out exactly what steps we were working under it. Also put it a little back on the teacher to take some ownership of the process in meeting some of those goals. And so this was just what we used to establish a guideline for that. I don't think you have this one. We did do a program support documentation. And this was just because we were only doing about 8 hours of coaching, this is just what we used to track our coaching hours for grant reporting. Super basic. So if you're a program that really hasn't started coaching yet, something basic like this would probably work for you. If you are a program that is like living in the coaching world and you're doing multiple rounds of coaching already, we did want to point out that NCPMI just released a couple weeks ago a brand new coaching log. So that is available on their website. It allows you to track the cycle number that you're under, record what focused observation strategies you used, and then also what debriefing strategy you used. And then it's also going to let you point out specifically like how many action goals you completed and then if there were any new action goals. And then of course that Excel sheet will aggregate all that data for you. So if you're starting, our form is awesome. If you're well into it, this would be a better option for you.
So a lot of times when we were coming out to work with centers, they were not familiar with coaching. I think a lot of them were more familiar with supervision and what that reflects back to their job performance. Instead of providing support on strategies and goal planning and action planning to be able to better what's happening in the classroom. So this was practice-based coaching a lot of times was very new. This was not something that we were able to fully implement, but we were able to give little bits and pieces of it for them to get a feel. So we would spend time doing a focused observation in the classroom. A lot of times I was there for 1 to 2 hours to really be able to get an idea of what was happening through the majority of the day. We would then follow up and talk with the teachers or the director or the team and review the observations, give them time to kind of talk about the areas that they identified were challenges during that time, and then some ideas and strategies that we could put into place to help correct that for them, to help them feel more confident. I think a lot of times coaching is really scary for new providers, as if you've all been there. You don't know if you're being judged. You don't know if your job performance or your employment is going to be based off of what the coach is saying to you. So it is a very scary place, and it was really nice that most of our teachers were very open to it, but it was definitely a new world for them, and letting them know that they had the safety and the understanding of the coaches to be able to talk about things that were hard for them and to not feel judged, and kind of sharing that piece of what coaching looks like for directors as well. So the next part is our behavior incident report. We did not use the BIR from PBIS and NCPMI. We created our own BIR, and that is in the packet that we've given you. It is in a very abbreviated version of an actual BIR, but we wanted to be able to introduce actual behavior tracking to these centers. So it wasn't just, he hits all the time, he runs all the time, they never listen, they never sit at circle time. Okay, well, can you tell me how often that's happening? What does it look like? What's happening around these routines that could be contributing to these factors? So we felt that it was important to really start to get these centers in the habit of providing data. If you have the data, this gives you a lot more credibility, and it can help us sit down and plan strategies to support what we're working on. We also wanted to provide the data for our outside community supports, so that if you're saying that these things are a challenge and this is what's frequently happening, we can hand this over to the TSS, the BSC, the early intervention provider, to show this is what's happening. So it's not just tally marks on a Post-it, parent your report, or so-and-so's report in the cafeteria. We wanted them to get into that practice so that if we do move towards pyramid model implementation, this is not going to be new for them.
Okay. And then we just wanted to hit on a little bit, because we recognize that not everybody is going to be the director of an early intervention office, and you might not be able to pull all of this together, right? But we also know that there are things that you can do within your program to replicate this model or to increase that community collaboration piece. And so the first is that idea of engaging with your early intervention offices, intermediate units, and mental health providers for training opportunities and networking. So most of them will provide some kind of training support, or if you reach out and say, hey, we're looking for this kind of support or this kind of help, just making that connection, utilizing your Keystone Stars quality coach. Look, I have it right on this slide. Okay. And technical assistance for program or classroom specific needs. So that is available if you're a program that has a license, you're enrolled in Keystone Stars, and so you have that available to you. Hosting networking opportunities and inviting other early learning programs and community partners to build relationships and increase communications. And Jess, you had a good example of that happening recently.
So one of the centers that I am actually working with for PBIS right now started out as a rapid response center. One of the things that we created when we were first working together was a community resource fair. So it was an open house night for the center at the beginning of the school year. They had Scholastic Book Fair there, so we got way more parent engagement. And then we also had the SPEC team. We had early intervention, the LIU. We had MHIDD case management from our unit in York and Adams County. And I believe we also may have had Head Start present. So it was really nice to bring all of those people present, to have faces shown to families so that they can make those connections if they have concerns about their child's development or their child's social and emotional challenges. So it's not trying to call blindly to somebody's voicemail. You can talk one-on-one with somebody right there. So that was a really, really great opportunity.
And then also thinking about your leadership team and who you're pulling into that. So if you have, let's say you have an early intervention therapist in your program that sees 4 kids, ask them if they want to engage with your leadership team. We have several programs right now that have done just that, and it has been a fantastic experience, and just that kind of collaboration where you're pulling in those community partners to really help you think through policies and what you're doing in classrooms is a great benefit and it's an easy thing to do on an individual program level, right?
So we're going to do one final parent share. So with the person next to you, just consider, what relationships do you currently have with community partners? Who else can you connect with besides the one that you've already identified? And how can you involve them in your program?
Need one of those fancy. She's like 70 years old. She looks good. I looked like her at 70 years old.
Yeah, she's like right in time.
Oh gosh. What's what?
241.
All right, take about 10 more seconds. Finish up what you're chatting about. We're going to bring it back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So, did you think about any community partners that maybe you haven't connected with yet that you could, or any community partners that you thought you could solidify a connection with? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Right. Right. Yep. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We like free, right? Free's good. Even if you have to wait for it, free's still good. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Maybe a little different, but I recently moved to another county to start work, and so I feel like I'm learning and trying to help build. But we use our school district. For those children that are transitioning into kindergarten, we are building a very great collaboration with the school district. Things that we've tried, strategies that work. Sometimes they even come in with parent permission and do an observation, and we can look at when they transition to kindergarten, what supports can already be in place. So it's a great collaboration.
I worked with that's a great point. Yeah, I worked with a school district that would send out to all the local early education providers would send out a form at kindergarten registration. They had parents sign off permission for their early learning program to release information, and then they would send out and ask for any assessment data that you had or anything like that. Yeah, that's a great connection.
They actually join us for our education meetings and things like that. So we're
Awesome. That's a great idea. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Prior to the children transitioning in, because we know that the transition is just going to cause an increase in behavior, so that we can be proactively prepared before the child arrives. We learned that the hard way, but boy, did it pay off.
Point. Yeah, anybody else? Any thoughts on how you can involve those community partners in your program? Were you able to talk through that at all? Oh, wait. Oh, you're going to make me run. It's okay. No, it's okay. I should have worn sneakers.
Our district goes out also proactively and meets with centers and kind of expresses our expectations, because kindergarten is not what it used to be. So we share a lot of our expectations and what we expect children to do, in hopes that they will take that feedback, right, because it's not mandated, but they will take that feedback and try to integrate pieces of it so that transitions are easier, and that for students that already have behavioral concerns or any type of delay, that they're kind of set up for success before they get there. But that's been huge.
Great example. I love that. Yeah, so I think just as you go, back to your programs, back to your schools, really take some time to think about, how can we solidify these connections? How can we make them more meaningful? What's going to really benefit the families and children in our program? And how can we leverage all of these resources to help support them? Because often if you know somebody, right, you can kind of bug them a little bit more. We'll say bug them. That's a nice way to put it. We bug people all the time. That's how we're here today. But you can kind of have that, once you build that relationship, once you make that connection, you can utilize it to really create some meaningful supports within your programs. And so we would just encourage you to do that as you go back.
And it's so much easier to make a 2-minute phone call to somebody who knows that you're calling, as opposed to having to leave a voicemail and call over and over and over and over again to get someone to pay attention to you. So thank you, everybody. Does anyone have any questions about anything? Okay. He'll tell me to give you the mic.
My question is, how are you getting your BHR agencies to be able to respond that quickly? Because I can make phone calls, and we have good relationships, but they have wait lists for taking referrals. And I don't work in counties where we have a high number of BHRS agencies. So that becomes a big struggle without hitting, like, does this child have an MA card?
So I think for us, what we've seen is that we haven't had BHRS come to the table yet with us. So we've been utilizing the MH case management from the county. And a lot of times they have some nice ins and connections with people who have gotten to alternative sources of support that we are not aware of. So that's why they have been so beneficial for us. I've seen that we not necessarily are getting them to get evaluations quicker, but at least we're figuring out if it's not this agency, does this agency have a shorter waiting list? Or if we address it this way, can we get the service that way? They just know things that we don't know. So they've just been a really fabulous partnership for us.
And when we're talking about the goal of rapid response really being the inclusion of the child, what we found is often that if we can get some supports in the classroom, even just through coaching, then teachers feel like we're making progress, and that wait doesn't feel as bad. Even though it might be as long, it doesn't feel as bad. So, anybody else? Sorry, no, you're good. I'll just hang out back here.
Through this rapid response model, how often, when you're talking about going into the classroom and coaching and they feel like they're getting the support so they can wait a little bit, where my mind goes is, as an early intervention provider, we provide the coaches to be out there weekly. And I'm wondering, is your program much more intensive? So what are you looking at as far as time that you're providing to the teachers?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So not all of the children have been identified as receiving supports through early intervention or IU services. So that's the difference. Most of the kids that we have worked with don't have those supports in place yet. Does that make sense? So we're really looking at teacher practice or classroom practice. Now, we might head towards an evaluation, right? We might say, yeah, this is going to be a piece that we're going to throw in there. But in the meantime, let's get the teacher some immediate supports, even though there's often a fast turnaround for that evaluation.
And I'd say in my experience too, it hasn't been children in the early intervention realm. It's actually been the kiddos in the 3 to 5 realm. So where there could be a gap from the IU services being able to provide any kind of support more socially and emotionally, that's where the gap has been. So maybe they have great language. Maybe they are ambulatory in the classroom. Maybe they have great scissoring skills, but they can't hold it together for anything at circle time, or transitions are horrific and they're starting to get bigger and they're throwing furniture. This is usually not early intervention referral. These are the kids that tend to be the outliers that don't fall under any real immediate qualifying need.
Take about one more question, and then if you have other questions, please feel free. We'll be up at the end.
So if you don't have an agency within your community who is a spec, in my counties, it's early intervention who provides supports that goes out and does that coaching prior to eligibility. That means we're really tight and we don't have a lot of warm bodies. So for guidance for us, what could you recommend?
I think you're going to have to get creative. I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are. I think it's calling in whoever is willing to be like-minded and to sit down and have a conversation about this and talk about where you can provide those supports, if you can lean on your county caseworkers a little bit more for mental health or not. I see your face. Or
And we have one county who has an awesome CAS coordinator. We can make it work in that county very quickly. I have 4 other counties that CAS goes like, they're how old? We don't do that, okay? And to look at mental health casework, getting in the door that direction has not been real easy either.
So for us, it really been like what you said about the like-minded people. We pulled people to the table that were just like, this is my passion and this matters to me. And if I have to totally shift my schedule to make this work so that this kid stays in this program, that's what I'm going to do. And so we have come back from vacation early and done all kinds of things just to make it work for these kids. And so I think it really is thinking about, okay, who would come to the table on this and who would be willing. That I think is what been a piece of our success with this, is really finding those people that were just passionate about those little kids who are getting kicked out of their programs.
And I think we're a little spoiled in York and Adams that we have an early intervention director who is all about new programs, trying new things, creating new supports, creating new services, and really addressing the mental health challenges and social emotional challenges that our kiddos are facing. So we have been really lucky that we have some people that are willing to be such big champions and to find grant sourcing and grant funding to get us to where we are. But it's been a lot of years of just saying like, hey, we've lost another one to another childcare center. And we all know those childcare centers where we're like, oh no, they're going there. Like, I hate to say that, but it's happening. And we know that that's what's going to be the outcome. So we need to stop it.
So thank you all so much for your time and for bearing with us. I know it's been a long 2 days, but hopefully a good 2 days. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon.